So today, let's just look at some memes. So we have this one about candy corn, how you're supposed to throw it away because everyone hates it. And oh, by the way, Epstein didn't kill himself. At least that's what a lot of people think. And the reason that these memes are going around the internet right now is because there was a new report that came out a medical examination of Epstein. Also, Project Veritas just dropped this video where they have evidence that an ABC anchor knew all this information about Epstein 3 years ago, but didn't report on it because it was essentially quashed. So we're going to look at those things a little bit later. Before we do that, let's just look at a brief overview of Epstein, who he was, and why he was well known. So Epstein was a billionaire, and he was involved in trading and finance and something like that. No one really knows exactly how he got so much money, but the fact of the matter is he was super loaded. Now Epstein is most known for being a pedophile. As the ABC News anchor we'll talk about a little bit later said, that Epstein is the most prolific pedophile in American history, and I think that's accurate. And the thing with him is not only did he sexually assault young women on a fairly routine basis, it seems, he also helped and invited other people to do so, and essentially it was involved in human trafficking to an extent. So you can kind of imagine Epstein, not a great dude, and the world is kind of better off without him. But let's just look at the whole story. In 2008, Epstein was arrested and charged for the solicitation of prostitution and procurement of minors. So basically for being a pedophile and being a completely disgusting person. However, even though there was ample evidence to show that he did it and there were a number of accusations, he was kind of just let off the hook. You see, he did plead guilty and he had to register as I think a low-level sex offender, but he was only in prison for 13 months. And not only that, he was in a private cell, which basically meant it was a luxury. Like, he was in prison, but it was kind of just a formality because he pleaded guilty and he had this incredibly good plea deal. And this isn't really the only time that people kind of knew about this. You see, he has a private island. And his island is known by the locals as either Pedophile Island or Orgy Island. So it's not like no one knew this was going on. People kind of knew about it. A lot of powerful people knew about it. But because he also was powerful, had a lot of influence, they didn't want to throw him under the bus. Kind of like a Harvey Weinstein situation, but I feel like quite a bit worse, honestly. A lot of people are focusing on this black book that Epstein had, which kind of includes names, addresses, phone numbers of a lot of powerful people, including, but certainly not limited to, Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Bill Cosby, and Prince Andrew. Now, just because your name was in this book does not mean you too were a pedophile or anything like that. It doesn't mean you were part of his ring of human trafficking. However, it does kind of raise some questions when you see names like Bill Cosby in here. But again, this just goes back to the fact that the reason he may not have been prosecuted properly the first time was because he was such a powerful person. He had so many connections. Earlier this year, however, he was arrested again, and this time in New York. You see, my understanding is that he couldn't be rearrested in Miami because he already pleaded guilty and that was kind of over. It was a double jeopardy issue. But he had done some of the same things in Miami that he did in New York. And so he was able to be rearrested in New York based on charges from Manhattan. These are the same basic charges where he was soliciting sex from a minor, basis of human trafficking, all these horrible, disgusting things. And there was ample evidence. If found guilty, which he probably would have, he would have spent 45 years in prison. Not 13 months, not a luxury prison like last time, 45 years, which to him was a death penalty, because he's pretty old. However, one morning this year in August, he was found dead, that he had a sheet around his neck, and so they had assumed that he committed suicide. Now, there are a couple of issues with what happened and what led up to this. First and foremost being that he was supposed to be on suicide watch list. You see, just a few weeks earlier, he had attempted to commit suicide in a very similar way, and so he should have not been left alone ever. He should have been watched all the time and at least had someone in his cell with him, like another cellmate. However, his cellmate had been transferred and they didn't deem it necessary to put in a new cellmate. So basically, they took him off suicide watch list after just a week or two. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't really feel like suicide is something you just get over in a week or two. That's not how it works. If he had done it once, it's obvious he would have tried to do it again. And it kind of makes sense that he would try to commit suicide because he knew so many powerful people. His name was being dragged through the mud, and it could just get worse if he starts naming names and throwing people under the bus, which is what a lot of people wanted him to do, because then we'd see who his connections actually were, but that's not what happened. Furthermore, the guards were supposed to be checking on him every 30 minutes. There were 2 of them that night, and they did not check on him for an extended period of time. For several hours, they didn't check on him, and so they found him dead eventually. Which, these things put together, they don't necessarily scream murder, but they do at least say incompetence. And when you're thinking about prison guards and guards in general, At least video games tell us they are fairly incompetent most of the time.
Just a box.
So it's not outside the realm of possibility to imagine that it was just incompetence by the prison. But there are still some questions about this. I've also heard rumors about camera malfunctions, which I'm not sure about. I couldn't get any sources to back it up, so I'm just going to leave it like that. After his death, the chief medical examiner in New York City looked at him and did an autopsy and said that it was consistent with suicide, that there was no evidence of foul play whatsoever. However, as you can imagine, a lot of people were not satisfied with that, including Epstein's own lawyers. And this is when things like #ClintonBodyCount started trending on Twitter. A lot of people are attributing this to the Clintons because there is the belief that the Clintons are essentially offing off their political opponents and people who could hurt them in any way. So that all happened back in August. Fast forward to just earlier this month in November of 2019, and there was this report that came out by the New York Times, which according to a pathologist or a medical examiner hired by Epstein's brother, he said that the autopsy done actually does point towards homicide. And specifically, he's referring to some of the bones in his neck that were broken, which are not very common in suicide, but significantly more common in homicide. So this medical examiner, working for Epstein's brother, believes that it was not a suicide, but in fact, it could have been a homicide. So at this point, who knows what's going on? It's really confusing. But what do you think? Are you more in the suicide lane, or do you think that it was homicide or murder? Let me know down below and give me your reasoning for each. Now, let's look into the Project Veritas bombshell, because I think this is really important. And that is that Project Veritas just released a video a few days ago where they have this ABC News anchor talking about how she had all of this information about Epstein, about him being a pedophile and all these interviews 3 years before this came out. 3 years ago, when this story was kind of still a non-story. Here we go.
Pictures, she had everything. She was in hiding for 12 years. We convinced her to come out. We convinced her to talk to us. It was unbelievable what we had. Clinton, we had everything. I tried for 3 years to get it on, to no avail, and now it's all coming out, and it's like these new revelations, and I freaking had all of it. I'm so pissed right now. Like, every day I get more and more pissed because I'm just like, oh my God, what we had was unreal. Other women backing it up. Hey, yep. There will come a day when we will realize Jeffrey Epstein was the most prolific pedophile this country has ever known. And I had it all 3 years ago.
So basically what happened is her story was quashed because executives and people, the higher ups, didn't want her talking about this story. Again, it could be because Epstein was fairly well known and fairly well respected among a lot of political individuals and powerful people. It could also be some of the connections he had. And the belief is, among many on the right, that the reason this story was quashed is because 3 years ago was the 2016 election. And Epstein had this connection to the Clintons. And since Hillary Clinton was running and was a fairly weak candidate already, the belief is that ABC didn't want to muddy the water even more, and they didn't want to put any connection with Hillary Clinton and Epstein. Which is a possibility. We don't really know what happened, but it could be. It seems reasonable. I mean, the media is not very believable or trustworthy at the moment. So, there we go. In response to that, ABC has come out and said that the reason they didn't publish those stories was because, quote, not all of our reporting met our standards to air. So they're saying there wasn't enough corroborating information to back up these stories, so we couldn't print them. Which is an interesting stance to take now, because where was that stance with the Covington kids, or with Brett Kavanaugh, or with this video that just came out like a month ago, where they claimed it was evidence that Syria was being attacked and the Kurds were being decimated, when it turns out the video was from a gun range in Kentucky. So apparently 3 years ago, the journalistic standards were much higher than they are now. I don't know. That seems like a really lame excuse, ABC. So hopefully that information was useful for you. Now you kind of know what's going on with Epstein and why people are still talking about him, even though he's been dead for 3 months now. So once more, let me know what you think about this down below in the comments. Check out some of my other videos you may have missed. And make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell if you haven't yet, so you can always stay up to date with information like this. Feel free to check out my sources down below, and I'll see you next time.